Very good evening and welcome to all the participants. This is the 79th Wise Views Leadership Conversation, and we are having Dr. M.R. Madhavan as the speaker today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. M.R. Madhavan. Welcome, sir, and thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Right. I will take just a moment or two to start the screen sharing, and I will make a brief introduction and then hand over back to you for your opening remarks, sir. So allow me to share the screen. As I said, this is the Wise Views Leadership Conversations. We have been having these every Friday evenings generally. And this is the 79th. And we are going to talk about India at 75, Parliament at 70. And Dr. Madhavan is going to anchor the conversation today. The agenda is very brief, including this introduction and the talk by Dr. Madhavan. It will be the first 30 minutes. Followed by another 30 minutes of Q&A. So I take pleasure in reading out the profile. Dr. Madhavan is co-founder and president of PRS Legislative Research. His work is focused on two related areas. One, strengthening the effectiveness of India's parliament and legislative assemblies by providing legislators with relevant research and enabling greater citizen participation with the legislative process. He held various positions prior to PRS. Dr. Madhavan worked for a decade in financial markets research across equities, rates, and currency markets at ICFAI Securities in Mumbai and Bank of America in Mumbai and Singapore. He holds a BTech from IIT Madras and MBA and a PhD from IIM Calcutta and has been honored as a distinguished alumnus by both the institutes. This is something very, very prestigious. He was also selected as the Business Standard Social Entrepreneur of the Year 2019. Thank you very much, sir, for agreeing to speak in our leadership conversation. Once again, from all of us here, a warm welcome to you and thank you for being here with us this evening. I will now request you to give your opening remarks, and after that, we will begin the clusters of questions. These questions have been collected at the time of registration. All the participants have keyed in their questions and we have landscaped them and sequenced in a manner that allows us for a sequential discussion. So over to you, sir, and I request you to start the conversation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Pleasure being here. And in fact, it's a pleasure seeing Professor Prasad, who was my senior in college, more than 30 years ago now. So I mean, we haven't met for 30 years, but at least an opportunity to see each other on screen after so long. So thanks for calling me. The way I titled this was India at 75, which you have heard a lot about. I mean, even the Prime Minister and various others talking about 1947 plus 75, 2022, right? So 75 years we have completed. But people have not actually talked much about the fact that it's also our first general elections. And the first parliament started in 1952. So parliament has also completed 70 years this June. So two landmark this year. And the reason I am actually connecting these two is something that we don't really, most of us, I mean, I don't think there is anyone here who was born prior to 1950. So most of us don't really appreciate what our country has achieved. I mean, there is a lot of, criticism, which is fair. We should be looking at what's going wrong so that we can improve. But there's also a lot of things that we have actually managed in the last 75 years and the last 70 years of parliament. And some of these are connected. In fact, these two are connected. The fact that we have been a republic for 72 years and a parliamentary democracy for 70 years. So if you actually look at when India became 1947 and well before that, I did not put the slides because that would have taken more time. But if you actually take up, let's say, the book by Ram Guha, India After Gandhi, which I think many people have read, the first chapter of that starts with the original background and what people are talking about India. And he has pulled out a lot of quotations, including from the late 19th century. There is a person called Strachey who used to teach in Cambridge. He used to essentially do the IAS coaching equivalent. So people coming for the Indian civil services from Cambridge, he used to teach them on how to expect India. And one of the things he says in that is that India is and never was a country. That's the first thing you need to understand, because there are people from Punjab, there are people from Bengal, there are people from Madras, and they are not the same people, they are not the same nation. And you go on, Mark Twain says similar things. And of course, there is a famous saying by Churchill, which says that, I mean, India is as much a country as equator is a point is a country, because it's just a geographical space according to them. The European notion of a nation state, and if you look at any country in Europe, it's essentially one language, one ethnicity, one religion, right? I mean, the Britain had a civil war in the 17th century, essentially, between two strands of Christianity, the Catholics and Protestants. And then finally they became a Church of England. It's one religion. Everyone is essentially one ethnicity and one country. And here we are, multiple ethnicities, multiple languages, multiple religions. I mean, you take multiple races, you take whatever. And of course, we have our unique invention, multiple castes, okay, which others don't have. And still, so everyone said India can't stay together as a nation. Too many fault lines, India will break up. That was the general consensus among all political scientists in the early 1950s. Well, here we are, we have proven them wrong. A second point, again related, is will India stay democratic? And people said, no way, it's too poor. And in fact, there have been serious studies. I'll just quote one study, which again is quoted in, again, a very good book called Battles Half Won by Ashutosh Vashni, where he quotes this study. They did a big regression model over from 1950 to 2010 or something like, or 2000, I think, some 50 years. They looked at a lot of countries. So there were over 200 regimes, some democratic, some authoritarian, and they were trying to find out what would explain that some countries are democratic. And the single biggest variable was income. So per capita income, if you're higher, and if you have income growth, you stay democratic, otherwise you get into authoritarianism. And India was the biggest outlier. India grew at 3.5% from 1950 to 1980 average. And still we, except for a brief blip of Indira Gandhi's emergency, we have remained, at least to the extent that we hold elections. Elections are reasonably free and fair to the extent that the person you vote for is the person who gets the vote. I mean, nobody's questioning that. The person who wins the MP, who gets the maximum number of votes in an MP constituency is elected as the MP or MLA. We don't really question that. There may be some rigging at the margin, but it's not that somebody is actually winning who has actually got lesser votes. We all accept that by and large. And that's a unique thing. And just to show how unique it is. So in Vashni's book, he has put this out. So I've actually taken the data and made it into a map. So if we take the set of countries which were colonial subject states. So if you actually look at the world map in 1945, let's say end of World War II, Asia was largely under European colonial rule. Of course, China technically wasn't, Thailand wasn't, the rest of it was. Almost all of Africa was under European colonial rule. And India got into...
One second. Are you changing the slides, sir?
Not yet, not yet.
Not yet. Okay. I thought this...
it's working. So it's working. Don't worry. So India wasn't... India was the first one to actually get, one of the first to get independence from European colonial rule in 1947, as we all know. And if you see 1947 to 1965, by and large, or maybe 1960, most countries got independent. Now you take this set of countries, which were under colonial rule in 1940s and got independent since then. So we are not talking about Western democracies like the European guys or even Australia or New Zealand. Now, this set of people who got independent, how many of them have stayed a democracy since then till today? Have not had army rule, have not had a police rule since then. And it's very interesting. There are exactly 7, which includes India, India plus 6. And there's not a single one of the other 6, which is of any significant size. So this is the set. Okay. So if you see, you have really tiny guys like Solomon Islands. There's no country which has even a population of 1 crore today. India is 138 crore or 140 crore. I made this map a year ago. So I guess 138 has become 140 by now. But whatever. I mean, the rest are really tiny. So that is a second achievement. So 2 major achievements. We have stayed together as a nation. Most of us may think that You are a Malayali or a Bengali or a Punjabi or whatever, but you will also think that you are an Indian. There is all of us feel sad when England beats us by 10 wickets because we feel we are Indians. Okay, there is that identity. And we have also stayed democratic. Both are strange. And my contention is we have stayed together as a nation because we have actually stayed democratic. It's actually a factor which has done that. It's not, otherwise we would have split up. And I'll explain why. And I'll actually talk about the parliament, which is the core part of my thing. So parliament is at the core of our democracy. I mean, we all accept that, right? I mean, that is the representative institution for which we vote as a democratic body at the national level. And of course, we also have representative institutions at the state level, which are our state legislatures where we vote for our MLAs, and also as an executive body at the local level where you will have, if you're in a city, you have municipal corporations or councils, if you're in a village, you have panchayats. But at the national level is parliament, and it's at the core of center of the whole democratic experiment we do. What does parliament do? It's important to understand, and why I'm my contention. As far as its functions go, parliament has primarily three large functions. It makes all the laws that we live by. So, okay, when I'm saying parliament in some of these, it is a short form for parliament and state legislatures. I mean, just take it as that appropriately. So every law that we need to abide by was either passed by parliament or by the state legislature in the state we live. So it's a lawmaking body. Second, which I would say is even more important, is parliament holds the government of the day to account for its action. It's a check on the government. So parliament can remove the government by a no confidence motion. Parliamentarians question on a daily basis using question hour. Committee meetings, they question the government, they hold them to account. So multiple ways that the government is held accountable. And that's extremely important in a democracy. That's because when we vote for a government, it has to be accountable to the people. It's accountable to the people through parliament. So being accountable to our representatives. Third is its financial function. So parliament, any tax that is imposed on you that you have to pay, a tax cannot be imposed on you unless there is a law for that tax. And that law has to be passed either by parliament or the state legislature, depending upon whether the jurisdiction is at the center or the state. So taxation power. And on the flip side, the government of India cannot spend even 1 rupee unless that has a prior sanction of parliament. So the budget that will be presented on 1st February also includes an expenditure budget. It has a ministry-wise demand for grants, which is examined by parliament and they approve. And if you actually go to detailed demand for grants, it has line item level of detail. So they can't even change from one line item to another without prior sanction of parliament. So parliament controls the purse of the central government. So in a way, we are paying through taxes, and that parliament on our behalf is keeping a check on the central government spending by pre-approving and post-monitoring. So these three things in this. And of course, while it is doing that, parliamentarians are representing our aspirations, our interests, etc. That's the representative part of the role. Why is all this important, and why should we be bothered about it? In a democracy, a very important thing that parliament does, which is beyond all this, is that it gives legitimacy to the actions of the central government. So if it is a dictatorship, the person acts, but you don't accept that the person is acting in your interests, or the person has the authority to act, right? The authority is gained by force of arms, but not by our consent. But when it is through a democratic process, for example, today, Mr. Modi is the Prime Minister of India. You may have voted for Mr. Modi, or rather for a BJP MP or against the BJP MP. That's up to you. You may like Mr. Modi as being your Prime Minister, or you may actually dislike him. That is your choice. But I don't think any of us doubts that he is a legitimate Prime Minister of India, because his party got the maximum number of seats in a legitimate election and they voted for him. And what the legitimacy does is, if you, let's say, disagree with the policies of the current government, all you need to do is to create an alternative policy, convince sufficient number of people of the country to vote for you, and you can form the government, which is what Mr. Modi did when he displaced Dr. Manmohan Singh, and which is what the Congress did when they displaced Mr. Vajpayee in 2004, the UPA did. So there is a peaceful transfer of power. If you see authoritarian states, it is always a violent transfer of power. So the legitimacy confers peace and security and safety to all of us. And people don't really think too much about it. To me, this is one of the most important functions that Parliament. So Parliament does a bunch of these things. Parliament also in the last 70 years has achieved a number of reforms. We have had a lot of social reforms. I mean, think of the space, let's say, gender, so dowry, various gender related things, caste related things, and a lot of other areas where our society had inequalities. Parliament has tried to address those. A lot of economic reforms, including the early days when it was believed that it's better to have a larger number of private public sectors because the private sector can't do. And of course, reversing that and privatizing. Initially was licensing, then delicensing, but at each point of time that was seen to be the appropriate action. So they have actually moved towards economic reform, social reform, even political reform, manage tensions. For example, if you actually, I just read this interesting report because I got my hand on it, which was the State Reorganization Commission's report, based on which many states were created in 1956. Linguistic states we have. And before that, Nehru was actually opposed to the idea when the Andhra agitation happened originally, because as a prime minister, he had a genuine worry. This country was split in 1947 on religious lines. If you strengthen linguistic feeling, will it actually again split on linguistic lines? And if you remember, Pakistan split on linguistic lines between Urdu and Bengali. And Sri Lanka has had linguistic, I mean, it's a tiny country, right? I mean, compared to us, it's smaller than, I mean, I don't know. I mean, some of you are in Telangana, I guess Hyderabad, some of you are in, Maharashtra is really large. Maharashtra is larger than the largest country in Europe by population, which is Germany. Okay. UP is, of course, larger than every country other than China and the United States, other than the rest of India. So we have large states, but it has remained together. So linguistic lines, but finally linguistic states were formed, and it has worked. In hindsight, we have done 65 years of that worked well. Lots of other things. So it's important that Parliament functions well. So I will just take a quick run you through some of the data on, if you want to see how well is Parliament functioning recently, and some of that is not really good news. So I have a few charts. So this is, okay, there is a minor error which I should have corrected. The first point doesn't start at 0 because it's 1951 when Parliament didn't exist. Okay, so ignore the first point on the line. But if you essentially look at this line graph, the red is Rajya Sabha and the green is Lok Sabha. It is number of days that they sat each calendar year. And if you see, in the 1950s, Parliament of Lok Sabha was sitting above 120 days almost every year. And so was it. It was definitely well above 100, close to 120 right through the 60s until my mid 70s, except one or two blips. And those blips are election years because you're losing a couple of months for elections. And now if you see, the green line has come down. We rarely get to 80 days. We are well below, we are in general at 75 days, 70, 75. So Parliament is working lesser number of days. And while they said there are disruptions, there are noises, they adjourn because they can't work. So they are supposed to work 6 hours a day. The actual number of days as a percentage of the scheduled time that they sat. And you can see it used to be about 100% actually. It has come down significantly. And in fact, during UPA 2 period, those 5 years, it was 67% average. So they lost 1/3 of the scheduled time. So number of days is coming down, scheduled time is coming down. Therefore, number of hours that Lok Sabha sits comes down, because obviously number of days less, time per day less, number of hours each Lok Sabha is coming down. So many bills are getting passed, especially if you look at the 15th Lok Sabha. You have more than 25% of the bills which are passed in less than 1 hour of discussion. So the bar shows Each bar is amount of time that they discussed before passing the bill. Now we are in the 17th Lok Sabha. 16th Lok Sabha was the last one, which was 14 to 19, and 15th Lok Sabha is 2009 to 14. Okay, so 2009 to 14 was really bad. 16th improved, we are again getting bad slowly. Then there are parliamentary committees which are expected to examine bills. Bills are referred to them. And you can see the percentage of bills referred to committees has drastically dropped from about 70% to about 10 to 15%. So you're not examining bills through committees carefully before passing. Budgets, the budget is, remember, the budget is somewhere about 35 lakh crore. That's the union budget. It's not a small number. And is being discussed with limited time of discussion. The number of confidence motions, number of important other motions have also come down. And it's very interesting that if you see the third Lok Sabha in the red line, okay, this is the Congress party in power 62 to 67. They were very much huge majority. Still, there were some confidence vote just to make a point, so that there's a discussion asking about the government. Government was never at risk, but that has come down. Even that's not happening. And adjournment motion is another motion which is taken to actually take serious business. That's also been coming down. States, if you look at state legislatures, the story is much, much worse. This is the number of days each state sat in the calendar year 2021. 2020, I'm not looking. That is a COVID year. Okay, maaf kar diya. 2021, which was not that much of a COVID, they were hardly, I mean, Kerala is an exception with 61 days. Odisha is okay, TN is okay, 34, but still it's 34 days a year. The state, my state, Delhi is not in the graph. Delhi sat for 8 days last year. Delhi is the last one, the last item on this. It sat for 8 days. Okay. I mean, you can see there are so many of them. Nagaland was 9 days. So, I mean, 9 days is the number of Saturdays and Sundays you have in a month. This is the number of days they worked in a year. And they're passing bills the same day or the next day. Naturally, if they are not sitting, they introduce a bill, they pass the same day. And look at, for example, look at Chhattisgarh, look at Goa, look at Jharkhand. Every bill was introduced and passed the same day or the next day. Bihar, which means nobody has seen those bills. So they're not actually doing their core role of examining the bills which are being proposed by the government, looking into them in detail, suggesting changes, and then passing them. They're just doing a rubber stamp work. So this is the worrying part. So I'm going to the last part of what I want to say is, coming back to this, it's extremely important for all of us. This is not to be left to a few experts, that our legislatures function effectively. I mean, all of us are voters, right? All of us have a stake in it. And the reason it's important for all of us that parliament and state legislatures function well is that they are the key institution for the future of our republic. And we need, if we want to have our freedoms, if we want to have a welfare state, we need these guys to be effective. So we need to work towards that. I have 3 reforms that I have a multiple number of things that I think we need to do. I have 3 particular reforms. I think I've already taken close to 25 minutes plus. So I'll just quickly mention them and I can address them in the Q&A if somebody has them. Okay. First and the most important is, I think the anti-defection law, which all of us know about, I think it has no place in a democracy, should not exist. It's not a question of making it stronger, should not exist. And I'll tell you why. What is the role of an MP? We vote for an MP, and the MP votes on our behalf and takes decisions on our behalf and to represent our interests in parliament. But let us say there is an MP who has a particular belief on a particular item, and that also matches with the interests of the constituency. And the party says no, but vote the other way. The MP has no choice but to vote the other way against the MP's conscience, against the interests of the constituency. Otherwise, the MP loses a seat, and whoever is going to do that. So the anti-defection law completely negates the whole idea of a representative democracy. I think Supreme Court erred in not striking it down on basic features, on basic structure. It, according to me, goes against the basic structure of a parliamentary democracy by making an MP a representative of the party and not a representative of the people of the constituency. And there are multiple problems which come with that. One major problem is, and I'll connect that to the second thing, which is that all of us have, I'm sure, seen the American elections, especially president's election, because it makes good TV and they show it well. It's good fun. And if you see, for example, last election, Biden, who had been a senator for a long time, people were asking him questions. And even in the primaries, when the other people who were senators were standing, people are asking them questions about their voting record. Why did you take this position in the Senate or in the House? And they had to defend them. And that is one way of holding them accountable. Here, the MP has a cop-out. It's an easy way. The MP will say, I didn't have a choice. The party told me. If I voted anywhere else, I would have lost my job. So I had no choice. So the anti-defection law completely takes the accountability of the MP to the people. So just to repeat that, the accountability of the government to the people in a parliamentary democracy like us is a two-step function. The government is accountable to parliament, and each parliamentarian is accountable to the constituency, because we can kick them out come next election. And the parliament can kick out the government through a no confidence motion. That's how the accountability chain works. We have spoiled both that with the anti-defection. And even more so, my second part is, we don't even know which way the MPs voted, because most votes happen through a voice vote. So the speaker says, those in favor say aye, people say aye, those against say no, people say no, and the speaker says, okay, I think more people have said aye. So the ayes have it. That's it. We don't have a record on who voted which way. So I live in New Delhi. My representative is Ms. Meenakshi Lekhi. I have no idea which way she voted, because it's not that I have no idea. Nobody has an idea, because, or even whether she was in the house, because there's no record of that. We don't do that. So there is a process in parliament. Any MP can ask for something called a division, and then you have seen in some votes, they say recorded, and there's a button and there's a screen on which it comes. My contention is that that should be there for every major vote. Third one, and I'll just stop with that. I have many more, but I thought I'll stop at 3, is if we want our parliamentarians to be effective, we have to give them the tools to be effective, which includes some of the things that we are doing. For example, PRS core role, one of its core roles is to provide research to MPs on every bill that comes. So MPs have no research support whatsoever. So if your MP needs to take a decision on, let's say, some issue related to water, some issue related to defense, some issue related to education, some issue related to insolvency code, how can anyone know all of these? Good democracies have research supports built in. We don't. So that we need to do. And we need to actually equip our MPs with the tools that they need to do their functions better if they want to. So today, they are unable to do it. One part is, okay, even if you equip with them, will they do? That's a different question. But if you don't equip with them, there's a necessary condition. If you don't do it, then they can't. I mean, the classic example that I give is, if you send out Virat Kohli to bat with a hockey stick, he can't score runs. You need to give him a bat. And we have given our MPs a hockey stick. So that's what my organization does. We have been doing this since 2005, which is to try to provide people with information about what parliament and assemblies are doing, as well as provide MPs and MLAs with research support on whatever they do as part of their legislative work, which is in parliament and in assemblies, not in constituencies. In parliament and assemblies, what comes. That's what we do. I'll stop with that.
Excellent, sir. Thank you very much for this amazing way you have presented. It's very, very simple, and it looks at us in a manner that, do we really know this? Do we grapple with this? I think the pitch is to help us appreciate that while India is at 75, Parliament is also at 70, and then is the Parliament functioning very effectively, and what are the lacunae and what are the tools required to strengthen them so that they work both smoothly as well as effectively. I think that's a fantastic account on what is all possible. Generally, on this platform, we have never dealt with this kind of subject. And when Professor Ved has introduced you to us, we thought we should definitely take this up. And all the leaders around the screen today will have to know, reflect, and think about our own role and our own understanding of the democracy that we live in, especially the fact that we remained a nation state because we have been democratic. I think that very, very clearly you have argued. and it is very, very true as well. Some of the features of our own parliament you have very clearly explained to us, and over a period of time, how the number of days that the parliament met has come down, and as a result, majority of the bills, which is a power as well as a tool to legitimize their actions, over there, these bills and the subsequent results of these bills and the impact of these bills will also be diluted, because not much of debate has taken place, not much of time has been spent, and most of the bills are probably cleared on the same day of its introduction. So therefore, the house that is supposed to be a house of debate and discussion on behalf of the people that these members of parliament or members of assemblies represent is actually not taking place. So the graphs are very, very clear, and your research proves that, and your suggestion and reforms on the three aspects that you mentioned is also very, very interesting. I'm sure there'll be several questions from the audience to actually make the whole conversation very interesting. Thank you very much, sir, for that. I will take a moment to acknowledge the fact that we are joined by several dignitaries today, including Professor Mahendra Reddy. Professor Mahendra Reddy is our immediate past Vice Chancellor of ICFAI University at Hyderabad and is currently a distinguished advisor to the ICFAI group. Welcome, sir. And we are also joined by one distinguished lawyer from United Kingdom based at London. We are joined by many others from other countries as well. So I welcome all of them, and we'll quickly move towards the Q&A session while thanking Dr. Madhavan for this wonderful opening remarks. I'll now invite Professor R. Prasad. Professor R. Prasad is our Director, Academic Wing at the ICFAI group level, at the headquarters level, and he brings a rich experience of 30 years to the table. He has handled several interesting and challenging assignments at ICFAI. Prior to that, he was an entrepreneur, and also he worked with the corporate. And he published several books, edited and as well, and presented many papers in conferences held in India and abroad. He is currently the professor and course mentor for the online MBA program that we have launched very recently, which is doing extremely well. I take this opportunity to thank Professor R. Prasad for his continued support, and I also welcome him to anchor the opening cluster of questions on the Q&A. Welcome, Professor Prasad.
Thank you, Professor Rao. That was a very insightful, taking us back to school days, but with very precise insights. But what we normally study in social studies, then leave it there and then, go in a completely different direction. But I think something which is very extremely relevant. So here, for the first cluster of questions, for the benefit of the audience, which is also going to see the recorded sessions, there are many, many who see that. And for many students who get bites of this, I intend to focus more on legislative research and how that can be made better, which I think that is the one of the thrusts that you have been mentioning about. Before we start that, there's a question about career and mission. You have had a very interesting background after IMCAL, and then you have taken up a mission here. I mean, it's a social venture. There is a mission involved. So can you give us a deco at the, what motivated you to take up this journey mission? How do you measure your progress? How do you look at it every year?
Well, perhaps it was a momentary lapse of reason that I did this. Okay. Very briefly, my career, I studied IIT Madras, went immediately to IMCAL, did my, what was called PGDM then, worked for a year, went back to IMCAL to do the doctoral program, got out end of 95, 96 January, I joined ICICI Securities, which was then the investment bank of ICFAI JP Morgan joint venture. Then about 4.5 years later, I moved to Bank of America, where I was there till 2005. During this period, I was in Bombay, and I was involved with some groups like Pratham, simply because my flatmate had moved there and he was doing that, and both of us were whatever. I used to hang around there. Then he moved to Azim Premji Foundation as the first person there, and was working on the Right to Education Act. They were trying to get it as a constitution amendment, and he was trying to get meet MPs and essentially advocate for that. And at that time, he figured out that MPs have no research support whatsoever. Because none of us, I mean, I had never met an MP in my life, like most people, I guess, in this room. Okay. We don't. So I was happily doing a banking career. And he was bouncing it off me. And by which time I had moved to Singapore also at some time. And then I thought, okay, this is something which is worth trying out. And we don't know whether it will work unless we try it out. So it's something important for the country that MPs have a strong research support, that our parliament works well. And I had personally been writing research on interest rates, equity, etc. Essentially, nothing to do with legislation, but for a very busy audience, how do you write crisply and convey the message? That was my training as in my job for a decade. So I thought the same skills could be applied to a different domain. I had the skills. I had been trained to do that. So I moved back from Singapore. My friend Madhavan moved. He had gone to the US by then. He moved back. We set up PRS with, I would say, a mixture of hope. I mean, largely with hope and no idea whether it will work. But we said, okay, unless you try it, we don't know. And fortunately, I had actually said 2 years I'll give, and I'll see what happens. If nobody uses our stuff, koi to naukari de dega. I have a reasonable enough CV that I'll get a job. I don't have to worry about it. But in 2 years, lots of MPs were using us. And so that gave us, in fact, the fuel to, mentally to continue doing it. So we have been doing it. We are structured for a very important reason. We are a not-for-profit. We don't get any, 100% of my receipts in my income and expenditure account, 100% is from donations and grants. I don't have any income of any type at all other than donations and grants. And the reason is simple. I guess most people here have some background in economics. A good law, a well thought out law, is a classic public good. I want every MP to actually be, the research to be available so they can take an informed decision. I don't want only certain MPs who are willing to pay, if I have a subscription model, to do that. So, and if I'm giving it to everybody, obviously I can't charge anybody because I can't make a differentiation between a person who is paying and a person who is not. And someone has to pay. So like any public good, it has to be paid by the public, either by the exchequer, which in India is very difficult to do. And it comes with too many strings. If you take anything from the government, then you don't have, you'll effectively lose your independence. You can see even large organizations like NCERT change textbooks every change of government. So they don't have the independence. What sort of independence will we have? So we said, if Indian citizens want something and value this, Indian citizens should pay for it. So we'll raise funding from Indian philanthropists. And if they're not willing to pay, we have failed the market test. We'll shut down. That was a philosophy. And fortunately for us, it has worked till now. It has not been easy at all at different points of time. We have had cash flow troubles at various points of time, but we have managed to survive throughout. We have managed to pay all our salaries on time right through the last 17 years. We have never actually delayed anything because there have been enough generous people who have done that. Who have given us the money. So that's the brief story of how I ended up doing this.
Excellent. I think it also kind of gives a lot of the audience an understanding of how things which are not visible when one is working before can crop up, what we call white space, and where there's a lot of value to be added. And from what you're making of it, as well as what is happening in the advanced countries, there's quite a bit of research going on, and I think far more has to be done. This is what you're pitching at. I'll move to the second question. Now we get a bit more specific. So here, if you look at India's parliament and its evolution compared to the others who've got this, legislative research, where is India's parliament in its evolution? Of course, the contexts are very different. So what are those peculiarities that India has which either amplify or attenuate this sort of evolution that we have?
A lot of it is, I think, I will try to answer that because to the extent I know about other countries, I'm not an expert on what exactly happens everywhere else because I'm not really a political scientist. But if you look at a lot of it goes back to the background of how parliaments evolved and the nature of the country. I mean, clearly Britain is the oldest parliament. And in fact, there is a 2-volume book, wonderful 2 volumes, by a guy who is actually, I think, still a sitting MP in UK called Chris Bryant. It's called Parliament, a Biography. It's there on the shelf behind me. So it's, I mean, these books are like paperback, sub 500 per volume sort of a thing. They're not expensive books. So he traces, because I was curious about how did England do it? And England is a slow process over 1,000 years or 800 years. Magna Carta, where the Lords said that the king can't act on his own, he has to consult the Lords. That's about it. So essentially, there was a few feudal lords, and the king could not tax them unless they agreed to pay the tax, and he could not wage war on France unless they agreed to it. That's about it. That's all that Magna Carta did. But it removed the concept that the king is divine and is supreme. He needs to consult. So conceptually, it was a big jump. And over a period of time, that moved to, I mean, somewhere in the 14th century, they started giving representation to the merchants, and because they started getting powerful, and knights and merchants, so the commons and lords started building up. And then, of course, England had its civil war, and after that, and slowly it took centuries to pull power out from the sovereign to parliament. And English parliament today, there's a core difference between UK parliament and Indian parliament. UK parliament conceptually is supreme in the nation. Indian parliament is subject to the Indian constitution. They are not supreme. So a law passed by UK parliament, period, that's it. A law passed by Indian parliament, if it violates the constitution, the Supreme Court strikes it down. So it's not supreme in that sense. The constitution of India is supreme. So there's a conceptual difference. Okay. So that is a sort of UK history, but they have a long history, and they have pulled power, and they are proud of that power. The other one is not a parliament, but an important model is the American one, which again was invented by them to balance, to ensure that power is not centralized. So very strong separation of powers between the legislature and the executive and the judiciary, very clearly mentioned out. And of course, a lot of it is in their context, because 18th century, when they wrote the constitution, all of the guys who were writing were rich landlords who were rich white landlords trying to protect their interests, naturally. But they also had wanted to ensure that their freedoms from the British king continued, etc. That's their context. Australia, Canada, New Zealand, etc. are essentially white Englishmen settled in those places who got independence and at the background. India is very, very different. All those countries, I mean, US today is getting a bit more diverse, but in their whole thing, nobody has large diversity. India is large, huge population, huge diversity. In fact, if you look at the UK, population of UK is 7 crore, 6.8 crore or something. It is, forget Maharashtra, I think it is as much as the combined Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, or Tamil Nadu or something, or it's definitely smaller than West Bengal. That's their population. They have 650 members of parliament in the House of Commons. We have 140 crore and we have 550 MPs. And the reason for that is, if you do similar proportion, how many people can you actually have in a room who can actually discuss? There's a limit. If you have 3,000 like China, then you'll become like China. It's a rubber stamp. So there is always a limit. So our parliamentary constituencies will be large by population simply because we have a numerator which is a large population and a denominator which is limited by number of people you can have in a parliament who can discuss. So A by B will be large. Okay. So we don't have a choice. So we should actually think of, and the way I would actually think of solving this problem is to reduce the power of parliament and increase the power of state assemblies and get more federal. And that is actually part of the constitutional scheme of things. It has got centralized more than what I think the original constitutional imagination was. But decentralize, do more states, because our states, what works for Tamil Nadu will not work for Himachal Pradesh or for Bengal. I mean, they are very different places. So let the local state people elect theirs and decide what is appropriate for them. That would be a way forward for us. So that's our, but still, given this diversity, to me, it's a wonder that we have actually survived. And I'm coming back to it. India at 75, if we want India at 150, we need parliament at 145. Otherwise, India at 150 will not happen. We'll break up. Or we have too many fault lines. And parliament is needed to actually negotiate the fault lines and to figure out acceptable compromise. Otherwise, we'll break up. And that's why I think it's very important. And I would like to travel from here to Hyderabad without a visa. And if I need that, I need parliament to function. I value that.
I think it's a very, very important area of discussion, an important area where we hopefully will make progress in whichever is best suited to the country's interests. And you have suggested a model there. I'll move to the next question. And this is about, I mean, again, getting back to the research part. A lot of people don't understand. And perhaps your understanding and experience there is much greater. What are the functional ways in which legislature currently gets to hear the voice of business and society compared to other leading society? What are the mechanisms which are already in place, either formal or informal? Can you throw some light on that? And could you take the case of, let's say, there was an IT information technology intermediary guidelines, digital media ethics code 2021. So if you take something like that, which is very, very current, something which is very current. How does this thing happen?
I don't exactly remember details of that particular rules, but I'll give you examples and how this works.
Sure.
So there are two formal mechanisms through which parliament functions. One is what you see on TV, which is actually the proceedings of the house. But what is, I would say, even more important in parliament's functioning is the standing committees of parliament. Okay, there are many committees. So there is something called departmentally related standing committee. And I'll give you actually a current example of the of the telecom amendment bill, which is the new telecom bill, which is coming up. And okay, so the standing committees are formed on lines of ministries or sets of ministries. So there are 24 of them. So there is a standing committee on finance, which also looks at corporate affairs and some related things. There's a standing committee on home affairs, the standing committee on education. The HRD ministry has been renamed education. So education, women and child development, skill development, those related areas, they look up issues coming to that. So what do these committees do? They do three things. One is bills, when they're introduced in parliament, may be referred to them. Okay. Second is they may pick up subjects for examination, so which pertain to the ministry. And the third is they look at the expenditure demand of the ministries which come under them, that they always do. Okay. Now, when they are doing this, they often put out advertisements. Even if they don't, one can write into them. Okay. And this is the forum for parliament to formally engage with stakeholders, experts, interested people, etc. Because I can't go into parliament when it's in session. If I walk in, there's a fine of 500 rupees and I'll be thrown out. Okay. But standing committees, if you write to them and if they find firstly, they will get your views, the written one. They may also find it worthwhile to invite you for a formal deposition and a Q&A. They do that very well. Personally, over the last few years on many bills, we actually write in our analysis, send to them, and they call us. I have gone more than 25 times across different standing committees, different bills, more than 25 bills. I have actually gone to depose to the committee, because then and what I've seen in those is that they don't act as representatives of the party. They are actually trying to understand your point of view, and they ask questions. And after that, they will come out with a report, but they are trying to understand the issue in detail from different perspectives. That's what they do. Okay. So the telecom bill, for example, in fact, the government has put out a draft bill. That bill is still available on the ministry's website. Ministry has asked for public comments. Just today, the deadline was November 10th. Apparently, they have extended by another 10 days. So if anybody here is in that space, and that also includes internet and digital to some extent, you should actually look at the bill. And if you have comments to improve your issues, you should actually write into the ministry. It's there on the telecom ministry website. Okay. Parallelly, the committee on its own decided that they will look at this draft bill. So about 2 weeks ago, they actually heard the secretary, etc., and they have started looking at it. And just to give you an example, we had prepared a note on the draft bill to send to the ministry. It's a draft bill. And we decided to send the same note to the committee also because they're looking at it. And I have got back, I sent by email as well as by formal post, what had delivery. On the email, I have got replies from a few MPs. A couple of them even SMS'd me, WhatsApp me, saying that this was useful. And I have some questions I might actually to understand. So we'll set up a meeting. So they are, my short point is, if they see you as a credible person, they are usually willing to listen, both as an individual MP as well as a committee member. So Parliament in that sense is a reasonably open body. And you can always write to your MP also, the person who is in your constituency. I mean, we have had very good, because when I came in, as I said, 2005, with Hope, I had never met an MP in my life. Okay. I was not part of the Delhi circuit. I had lived in worked in Bombay and a bit in Singapore. Okay. But so all we did was to write and send. And they started calling us. So in that sense, it's a very open system.
Excellent. So we have the formal way, and there seems to be a good potential in what the parliamentary standing committees are doing, and they seem to be pretty open about it, and you're able to vouch for it. Are there other ways by which you can, informal also?
You can always meet MPs. You can write to them, ask for a meeting. So the key thing I would say in any of this is that why would they give you time? Because their most precious resource is time, if they think it's useful for them. So some of the things we do is, our notes are very short. No note is more than 6 pages. Very often it's 2 pages. If you're writing a letter, it's 6 bullets, 8 bullets, so that the person sees. If it is 30 pages, nobody will read it. They will say, "Acha, pad lenge," and it will be on the stack, and then more things of pad lenge will be further up the stack, and it will never come. But if it's a 1 page, if you receive something is 1 page, comes to you, before putting on the stack, you will glance at it quickly. Kya hai? And if there is something that registers immediately, you say, okay, you'll tell the PA, okay, inka meeting kara do. So you need that. And even while meeting, I mean, usually we have I have a 5-minute, a 15-minute and a 30-minute explanation of anything. I have a 5-minute. You want the most complex bill? I can tell you 5 minutes, whatever. What is the one most important? Because sometimes you have only 5 minutes, the guy is rushing. But if you do the first 5 minutes well, the guy might give you 15 minutes more because you captured the attention. So my thing is time, we have to respect that person's time, and they are willing to do. If once you build credibility, they are willing to do that. So that will be the informal way in that sense.
Fantastic. I think just a small supplementary question here. When you pitch for this 5 minutes kind of a thing, or the 2-pager kind of a note, what kind of points do you keep in mind with respect to the target MP?
Okay, so for us, PRS does not advocate any position on anything. So actually, what we do is, what is our objective is that the MP should be well informed. MP should be well informed before taking. So what we say is, okay, this bill has these 3 major things, and these are the 2 important issues that you should look at. For example, in the telecom thing, there is a wire business and a content business, right? Are you going to regulate them the same way, or do they require different treatments? The bill looks at them similarly, but does that make sense? Because the wire business is high capital, and it's actually this thing. Content is, so are you going to regulate and license? Wire may require licensing, content may not, today is not. So how do you do that? I mean, the person understands, the person says, "Acha, theek hai." Then you can elaborate more. So you say that, then the person asks for more. Or for example, there is this child marriage bill on which we wrote a note, which is actually increasing. So today, the legal age for marriage in India, except for some personal laws, the legal age is 21 for males and 18 for females, right? Minimum. They're amending this. There's a bill in Parliament amending this for 21 for both, saying equality. Our question was, equality fine, should it be 21 or should it be 18? Because you're a major, The Indian law recognizes you as a major when you're 18. So should actually you do 21 for both, or should you actually reduce male to 18 because they're majors, and you're getting into all sorts of trouble by not giving people between 18 and 21. You have given them freedom on everything, including right to vote and right to drive, except the right to marry. So is that being consistent? That was the question. Something to think about. Right?
I think you've focused in on without any bias.
Yeah.
Kind of key issues, 1 or 2 or 3, whatever may be as pertinent there. Excellent. I think it's clear. Now comes to the natural corollary. There are a few more, but I'll take one which is very pertinent in this context. And that is, if this is the situation, how do you improve the culture of stakeholder participation from all those in the audience or in the country who need to participate, who are relevant? How do you increase or step up this culture?
I would say there are different, okay, put it this way, there will be 2 reasons why people are not engaged. One is they don't know how to, and 2 is they're not willing to. They don't have the bandwidth. I mean, if you are asking somebody who is at the poorer end of the spectrum and is working 15 hours a day pulling a cycle rickshaw, the guy, he'll have opinions, but he doesn't have the time. He just barely enough time to survive. So, or there may be people who are rich enough and this doesn't matter. Hamara life to aram se chal raha hai, right? Why should I bother? So one is the intent. To me, intent we can't do anything about, right? The poorer guy, okay, you improve incomes, his intent might change. The other in one card. But a lot of it is also because people don't know they can engage. And they don't know that these are processes. So one needs to bring in transparency and provide that. One of the things we have been trying to do with, I would say a bit of a limited success, is that, for example, parliamentary committees identify subjects for identification. It comes out in a Lok Sabha bulletin which nobody sees other than us, because it's our job to see. So we actually pull it out, put it out on our website, put it out on Twitter. When a parliamentary committee looks at a bill, they put out an advertisement, which you will find in a newspaper in the middle of all those tenders. There'll be a page with tenders, in the middle there'll be a parliamentary committee. And I'm sure, now many people are not even reading newspapers on paper. But even if you're reading the paper newspaper, you go past that page, right? I still get the hard copy paper, but that page I don't see, I go past. But we also track Parliament and we know that notification has come. So we try to publicize that and get that out. And we are also trying to do, especially for slightly more organized groups, which could be lots of NGOs working in this space, various different types of civil society organizations. It can be NGOs, it can be unions, it can be industry associations like NASCOM and CII, any groups. Some of them, of course, the industry associations know what they're doing because they're good at their job. But even them, we actually do sessions and try to explain things. But it is, how do you make the system more, how do you get people to know that, like just now I was saying that there are these opportunities. People don't know there are these opportunities, so they won't even try using them. Even if they want to, they have the intent, but they don't know that they can. So what we can do is to try to tell people that they can.
I think the moral of the story is that there's space to do far more here.
Yes.
And there's something being done. Yes.
Yes, and I would also say that one of the strengths of a democratic system, which we don't do well, is to actually ask our MPs, the particular MP who is in your constituency, questions about these things. Don't vote just because the person is the same caste or the same religion or something like that. Vote if that person is doing what you think is right in policy terms, whatever you think is right, because that is your choice. So that's the way the democracy works. Because then that person's incentives will be to actually think about this and work on this, because this means votes. The person wants votes.
Yes.
Election.
So apart from the parliamentary standing committees and trying to get across to them with respect to your point of view, also look at your
own MP.
Your own.
The MP should know you are from his or her constituency.
Yes.
The MP is accountable to you. You're not accountable to the MP. MP is accountable to you.
Good. We will stop this cluster here. I hand it back to Professor Rao for the next.
Thank you very much. I have been waiting. While I was waiting, it's been very interesting and insightful, I must confess. I'm sure it is the same for all the members around the screen today. Sir, what I will do is I will request the audience to ask the questions directly, and I will restrict to one or two questions. So those folks who have raised hands will be honored. Immediately, we will get to you, and we will open the mic for you to speak to the distinguished guests that we have. But let me ask one rudimentary question about the parliamentary standing committees. The subjects that they take up, how do they arrive at these subjects, sir? If one wants to get on the subject on the list, how does one do that for the parliamentary standing committees?
The 31 members of the committee decide.
Okay.
So you have to reach out to them and say these are important ones. And if, let's say, even one or two MPs are convinced, they can take it up in the committee meeting, and then they can decide. They typically pick up about 10 subjects a year.
Okay.
So you have to, so the person has to be convinced that this is important enough to be among the 10 in that year, right?
Great. And these committees, where do they source their inputs from? In the sense, there are members in that, but is there, apart from the ministry, where else do they get these inputs from to handle those issues and reflect on that, apart from the views given by those, assuming that ideally nobody goes to them and nobody shares any points of view as far as citizens are concerned? It is possible theoretically.
Yeah, they call in some citizens, and this is a serious problem with India. So in the UK, for instance, and even in the US, UK has, every committee has a research cell attached to it. Okay, US is extremely, there's something called Congressional Research Service, okay, CRS, which has 700 people, which is part of the Library of Congress. It is a $110 million budget, which is purely supposed to provide research to the members of the Senate and the House of Representatives and their committees. We don't have any. So that was my last point. We need to build research support systems for them. And I agree, I mean, that is a shortcoming. There's a shortcoming of the system. We haven't invested in the soft infrastructure.
Right. Yeah.
We're building a great parliamentary building, new one now. I mean, to me, it is like setting up a brilliant building for a university, but not having faculty, right? I would rather be in a garage with a good professor than in a nice air-conditioned hall with a bad professor.
It's very clear. It's very clear. You would rather be in a garage with a great professor. So building physical infrastructure is not as important as having research and foundation for what is actually transacted in that Parliament House. I think that's a clear point there. Thank you, sir. So one more point I'll take, and we will request Mr. VSS, Mr. Venkata Subramaniam, to be ready to raise his question. We'll allow also him to talk. But then I'll take one point here. That is, what is your view on a two-party system? Apparently, is it going to strengthen the quality of debates and seriousness in the functioning of Indian Parliament as well as in assemblies? What's your view on that?
No country has a two-party system. US does not have a two-party system. Their parties have coalesced to become a two-party system. Okay, it is like, if you look at the state of Kerala, it's effectively, there's an LDF and a UDF, and now BJP biting at the margin. But for a long time, UDF and LDF. Is that a two-party system, or is it a two-coalition system? How do you call it? So Democratic Party is essentially a large coalition, like the Congress, Indian National Congress used to be in the 1950s and 60s. And so is the Republican Party. I mean, so they have evolved into that. If you look at every other country, they're multi-party. UK is multi-party, Germany is multi-party, Israel is huge number of parties. I mean, every country of any size is multi-party. So this two-party is some misunderstanding of Americans, and they have their own issues. We don't want those issues. So I don't think it doesn't matter. What matters is, do we have faith in the fact that the person who has been elected is legitimately elected? Do we have others who have the capability of questioning them and holding them to account on a daily basis? It can be 15 parties. You can still do that.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir. Thanks for responding to that. We'll now request Mr. Venkata Subramaniam to raise his question. Over to you, Mr. Venkata.
Hello, good evening.
Good
Good
evening.
evening, sir. I would like to ask two questions. One is simultaneous elections to both center and states. It was possible from 1952 to 1967, 15 years, 3 terms. Why is it so difficult to conduct this simultaneous elections to state and center, avoiding reducing lot of expenditure, and also this model code of conduct time? And always we are in the election year. Every year there are 2-3 assembly elections are happening, and by elections, of course. So why is it so difficult now? It was possible some 70 years back. That is the first question.
Okay.
I asked the second one also now. It's
Yeah, you ask the second one and I'll
yeah.
answer both.
Second one, in urban areas, if you see the voting percentage, either parliament or assemblies, it is generally 50 to 55 or at the most 60. If it touches 60, it's a great achievement. So why it can't be improved? Whereas in rural areas, it goes up to even 80% also. Whereas in urban areas where the educated or literate people, the percentage is more than 75%. So why is it difficult? How to improve this? Yeah, these two are my questions.
Okay. So I have very different ways of looking at it. First one is a structural issue. Second one is a behavioral issue. How people behave, right? The first one, I don't think a parliamentary system, you can theoretically create a model with simultaneous elections. It's not possible. Okay. I'll tell you why. Up to 67 was a coincidence, because I mean, it was essentially Congress party winning in states, Congress party winning in the center, all governments lasting 5 years because they were having comfortable majority. With one exception, it was not fully simultaneous because Kerala did have a slightly different cycle, because there was Communist Party, which was then kicked out through president's rule and elections held. So it just moved, but most were that one. Now, I'll give you an example, okay, of why it's not possible. Let us take, let's say, the Delhi elections of 2013. Okay, the result. And I'll slightly tweak it, but even that result. Delhi has 70 seats. Okay, AAP got 28 in that election. Okay, the BJP, which was in coalition with Akali, got 34. You need 30. 35 is midway, 36 to have clear majority. They got 34. Okay, AAP got 28 and Congress got 6. Okay, now none of them is willing to actually have a coalition with the other two, and each of them is willing to pull down any of the other by. So if A is forming a government, B and C will actually vote against that government in the no confidence motion. Okay, so the government goes. Okay, so you cannot have a stable government in this structure. And here it is 34, 28, 6, but think if it was 30, 20, 20. Okay, there's no way you can form a government. Okay, the only way out is to have elections again. And once you have elections again, you're moved out of the simultaneous. So state after state, this will happen, and we actually went off kilter. Okay. One thing that people have proposed is the German model, which is to say that the no confidence motion is effective only if an alternative government can be formed. Otherwise, the old guy stays on. To me, that poses serious legitimacy issues as well as serious practical issues. Legitimacy clearly because the person who is now being the chief minister or the prime minister does not have is opposed by a majority of people in parliament. They can't find somebody else, but a majority opposes that person. So how is that person legitimate? And practical, every bill, every motion, everything that the government brings will be defeated. How can a government function if every proposal of the government is defeated? So you will have a complete logjam, like which is the weakness of the American system sometimes, when the Congress holds up finances for the executive. We don't have that because parliament, by definition, the prime minister has a majority in parliament and the chief minister has a majority in the state assembly, in the lower house, by definition, by structure. Okay. So you have these issues with simultaneous elections. So I can't see how, even if you actually force it back to a simultaneous elections by extending some assemblies and reducing them and getting back once, how in another 15 years it will not go out of kilter? It will. There will be a phase difference. So that's my first thing. On the second, I don't know. I mean, if there is the only solution I can find, which I personally don't like it, but only conceptual solution is to do a Singapore or Australia model, which is compulsory voting, which says that as a citizen to enjoy the benefits of citizenships, including safety, security, the defense forces protecting their borders, etc., it is your duty to vote. So you better vote. So if you don't vote, there is a fine and a penalty, unless you can bring serious cause like a medical certificate or something that disabled you from voting. So one, but of course that goes against the idea of freedom. I choose not to vote. So do I have to vote for A or B because A or B are studying, or can I say I choose not to vote? So there are these things. If you don't have that, if people only thing is trying to get people more aware, my guess is it doesn't matter for urban people. Whereas rural people, their situation is they are poorer and the representative matters more to their daily life, needs to get them things done for them. So they are actually more possibly involved. That's my guess. And you can actually see a trend also. Richer countries have a lower vote share than poorer countries in general. Somewhere. So that also works. But I don't know. I don't know exactly answer for that. And the only way out is compulsory voting, which I personally don't like.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thanks for answering that beautifully.
Thank you.
What we'll do is now we'll request Mr. Arun Kaul to raise his question. Mr. Kaul.
Good evening, Mr. Madhavan. That was a wonderful presentation. I have a question, but before that, there's a disclaimer that I am not an expert or a knowledgeable person. I am just a layman. And so if my question doesn't seem, it's a clarification that I wanted from you. See, you spoke about the anti-defection law. Now, my opinion is that we vote for parties in India. We don't vote for individuals. And it's forget the independents. Those are a very small percentage of people who get in. But we generally vote for parties, and we don't really go into the detail of the manifesto, but the main points of the manifesto or what their ideology generally is. So when MP is there or MLA is there, in my opinion, he should follow the party line, number one. Number two, is that if you remove this, then what is happening in the country today, the ruling parties are in places using all sorts of methods like threats on one side of ED and CBI and income tax. And on the other hand, motivating them with whatever, I don't know, these figures floating around 10 crores, 15 crores, 50 crores. These are the perceptions that we as Indians have. And of course, offering them ministerships and, chairmanships of various bodies, etc., and opportunity to make more and more money. So, and people you are seeing all over the country, state after state after state, they are en bloc, en masse defecting to the other party. So isn't that a thing which I thought we should strengthen rather than remove it totally? So I don't know whether you'd like to clarify what's wrong in my thinking.
I'll explain my thinking. I have heard this from many people, and lots of people think of this way. Firstly, at least in theory, until 1985, when we amended the constitution to bring in this anti-defection law, the word political party does not appear in our constitution. And even now it appears only in that 10th schedule, one place, which is the anti-defection law. So in a parliamentary democracy, we vote for a person who represents us, who may or may not belong to a political party, because you also have independent standing. Okay, we allow that. So we don't actually vote for the party, we vote for the person. Okay. And why is that important? Because in a geographical constituency, the person is accountable to us, and that's how the accountability is maintained. You cannot hold a party accountable to you. You can hold a person accountable to you. So the accountability, which is a core part of democracy, accountability of the representative to the represented can happen only if there's a person. Now, there are other systems which we don't have, like Germany has something called a mixed list system, where you actually vote for party, or rather this thing, and party decides who is. So the party which gets 10, I'm simplifying it. Let's say a party gets 40% of the vote share, they will get 40% of the representatives, and they will decide who will be there. You don't have a choice. I mean, there's a party list. In fact, interestingly, the current Prime Minister of President of Sri Lanka, he came in through the party list because he lost his seat actually. Okay. But so that is the conceptual. And the reason this is important is again that the government, and in fact, this goes back to the constituent debate thinking. Ambedkar, and I would actually suggest you can actually look it up and read. It's available on the net. It's all of 3 or 4 pages. Ambedkar's speech at the Constituent Assembly on November 4th, 1948. Okay, the day he was introducing the draft constitution for consideration, and he explains the features of the constitution. And there is a nice 3 or 4 paragraphs where he discusses the difference between the presidential form and the parliamentary form. And his logic is that the presidential form provides stability, because in the American system, you cannot remove the president unless the person is caught stealing or committing a crime. I mean, not because the person is unpopular. You can't remove stability. But the cost of that stability is it reduces accountability, because you can't remove the person. 4 years, you have the person. The Indian parliamentary system increases accountability because the person is accountable to parliament on a daily basis, and you can have a no confidence motion and remove. You can have questions, you can have all sorts of accountability. And by definition, you are trading that for lots of stability because the government can fall. And the argument there was that given the country's position, it's better to go for more accountability because we don't want a dictatorship or something to come over. We need accountability more than stability. That safety factor we need. Now, if you think of that, the MP should be, regardless of the party, should be able to question the government. And on every bill, we are not talking only about no confidence motions. Let us say on a State Bank of India amendment bill. Okay, even here, every party says vote yes or vote no. And there is no party ideology. You haven't voted for the party because the party has a view on the State Bank of India amendment bill. But if the party says vote this way, the MP has no choice. So what we have done is handed over power to a few party leaders. And also what this means is, because the leader of the largest party, especially if it's a situation like now or last when it was with Rajiv Gandhi or Indira Gandhi, when there is a single party having majority in Lok Sabha or which are there in states, then the MPs elect the leader, the person becomes Prime Minister or Chief Minister. Now that person cannot be removed for 5 years because anybody voting against that person is disqualified. Who is going to vote for that? Now look at the situation in England, for instance. I mean, there is instability. It's fun to see what's happening with Boris Johnson and Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, etc. But it's also accountability working. They have to justify. And people haven't moved parties. So in mature democracies where no democracy has this, I mean, just to, again, part of my research, the form of anti-defection law which you have, where any vote you vote against, you get disqualified. We share with 5 other countries: Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sierra Leone, Guyana, and Zimbabwe when it was done by Robert Mugabe. We are in that club. No one else has it. Now to the second part on MLAs vote and they move parties and there is instability. Yes. But what have we done? We have, in essence, moved from a retail market for MLAs to a block sale, wholesale market for MLAs. They move en masse now, is now moving one by one. That's all we have done. We have not reduced defections. You are seeing more and more of that. and you have increased the price because a block sale price is higher than a single sale price. So you have actually seen an increase in corruption. The solution to this actually lies, it's a political issue and solution lies in political answers. Like, why do Conservative Party members in the UK or Labour Party members in the UK rarely move to the other side? Because parties essentially mean a broad ideological alignment and not on every point. So let's say, I mean, somebody asked about a two-party system. Let's say not two-party, you'll have, let's say, 5 parties, you'll have 10 parties. You will not have 1,000 parties. Okay. So let's say we have 3 or 5 parties. Now, you want to join a party or you want to align with a party, you will go with a party whose ideology broadly matches with yours, but not on every point, because it can't. There are only 5 things. It's like the horoscope in the newspaper, which divides the world into 12 sets, right? Obviously, there are way more nuances. You can't have 3 sets or 5 sets. Now, I don't agree on everything, but I'm with the party broadly. Now, if there are clear ideological positions parties have, and people have gone with that, they won't move parties because they are in the party because of a broad ideological alignment. Unfortunately, in India, very few parties have ideological clarity. I mean, I can frankly think of only the BJP on one side and the communist parties on the other side who have ideological clarity. Who else has ideological clarity about what that party stands for? I don't know. I don't understand their ideological positions. So if they build that, then they will build loyalty. And then they will be punished by the population for moving. Now the population doesn't punish, right? I mean, latest example or 2 years ago example, Mr. Scindia moved with a bunch of his MLAs in Madhya Pradesh. They all went for re-election. I think out of 22 or 24, all but 2 of them got re-elected. So they actually got validated by their electorate for their move. If the electorate punished them for moving out, then the next set of guys will not move out. That's the message. So you need greater ideological clarity for parties and people, then will align to them. Now for everybody, wo local leader hai, hamara kaam karata hai. I don't care which party he is, right? So they are free to move parties. They're effectively, everybody is independent in that sense. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. But somehow, my take on it would be that the person should resign and then stand again, because, after all, he has been given a party ticket and he's fought the election. And
but for every issue? For every issue?
No, not for every issue. If he's defecting to another party,
that we can do. But currently,
he should have the freedom to vote maybe against the whip or whatever. But if he's defecting to another party, then he should resign from the party he was elected, the ticket on which he was elected on.
Yeah, so there is that solution has been proposed by, for example, Manish Tiwari, who have brought in a private member bill a few years ago, where he said it should apply only to confidence, no confidence motions and money bills, not for other bills. That's the solution you are saying, which might work. But let's say in insolvency and bankruptcy code, I mean, why should I, if I know the subject well, why should I not vote the way I think it should be framed?
Absolutely, yes.
But that is the way today it is. Today the party says vote for it and you have no choice. You have to be present and vote. Even if you're absent, you can be kicked out of parliament.
Yes.
And by elections.
Yes.
That's my problem.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kaul, for raising that question. Thank you, sir, for answering it. We have completed 90 minutes of the conversation. We'll take 2 more questions from the audience. I am putting my questions aside. Very quickly, Mr. Ghanshyam Garg, would you like to raise your question very quickly?
Hello.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Hello, Madhavan sir.
Yes,
You
sir.
have shown a curve where the percentage of days and hours were much higher in the beginning of parliament.
Yes.
In the beginning stages, 1947, 40, 50. Now it is reduced so much that chaos has created in the parliament. So what is the remedy of this? How we can bring back the same situation?
Okay. Shall I actually take both questions and then answer them? Because if they're related.
Yes.
We'll ask Mr. Ramesh to raise his question, and Mr. Ramesh, please simplify the question. Yeah.
Good evening, sir. Good evening.
Yes, sir.
My question is, in this AI era, artificial intelligence era, is it the right time to transform as per the latest trends with the sophisticated available tools, that is latest intelligent systems? Is it possible to do that?
I don't really, okay. I'll answer the first question and then I'll come to this, which are very different questions. Okay. Frankly, day's decline, again, it has to be by public pressure. So we should actually write more about it. Media should ask them, because parliamentarians respond to public concerns. So we should actually tell them they should work more. And there are some structural issues, of course, which is that it's very interesting the way the Constitution says, Parliament is summoned by the President. That's when Parliament meets. President acts on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. So effectively, the Prime Minister or the Chief Minister in the state decides when Parliament or the state legislature will meet. So Prime Minister of the day decides. Now, Parliament is primary job is to hold the Prime Minister to account for the actions of the government to account. Why will you actually call your supervisor or auditor or monitor for more days? I'm happy when my monitor or supervisor is not around. Okay. So structurally, there is a problem there. I would say the answer would be like the UK, where they actually have a full calendar of the year published beforehand, so that any deviation puts moral pressure, or say that if a certain minority, because obviously the government has a majority, let's say 25% or 30% of MPs want to have a session of parliament, it must be called. You have to actually amend the constitution to do that. And to say there should be a calendar published, that could be various ways. But to do all of that, we need actually more public pressure and people talking about it. The second one, frankly, I don't know. I don't understand this space. But fine, it's at the end of the day, politics, parliament, and we have to understand what function do politicians do to society, in society. They have an extremely important, though we use that word derogatorily many times, they actually perform an extremely important function to hold society together. Their job is to, in a way, figure out the middle way across a lot of conflicting interests. That's what politicians do. And it is a very human thing. I mean, you are trying to negotiate between different interests. You are trying to push people and figure out, okay, you're not getting all that you want, but you're getting something. The other guy is also not getting all they want, they're getting something, and so on. So that negotiation is a very human thing. I don't think AI works there, at least to the extent that I know the way the AI of today works. Maybe in the future, sometime you will have machines running the country and all of us, we don't even have to vote because the machines know best.
My interest is we are going to downsize the time, actually redundant, in order to reduce the complexity reduction, as well as we are going to not going to follow the legacy systems.
No,
that is my
systems can be automated, but
yes,
but there's a lot of judgment, right? I mean, for example, let's say land acquisition. Okay. The question is, you need land for development, infrastructure, etc., which are owned by people. And if the guy doesn't give, you don't get a highway. So you need to take the land. Okay. But it's also somebody's personal private property, and that person may have even attachment, maybe grandfather's or great grandfather's house, and you have emotional attachment, forget the financial thing. How do you negotiate this conflict? It's a human question. Machine can't do it. And there'll be lots of those.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. We'll quickly ask Shweta Anand to raise her question. Now, over to you, Shweta.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. A very good evening to one and all. Sir, my question is regarding technology, and it's more so ever related to use of social media. And we have seen that happening in case of US election in 2016. There were allegations of misuse of social media. So how insulated is Indian democracy? And how can what are the various ways and means in which we can ensure that it is not misused through such tools?
Okay, I actually don't know. I don't have an answer. But to the extent I know, what was the allegation of misuse in the US? It is that they used, for example, they used the Facebook information to target certain set of people who are voters with certain messages. But finally, it is up to the voter to decide whether to absorb that message or not. So earlier it was through TV and radio and posters and door-to-door campaigning. Now it is through Twitter and Facebook and various things. And of course, through Twitter and Facebook, you can personalize much more because you get information about that person's interest and proclivities. But which you can't personalize in a larger mass media, except through door-to-door if you have local information. But finally, it's up to the voter. There's no allegation in the US that the voting was rigged. It was that the voters were given certain messages which changed the way they voted. Well, it's up to the voter to decide to absorb that message or not.
But the exposure, the social media exposure, does it have any impact or tends to have any impact on the psyche of the voters?
Of course, but it's an equal field, right? In fact, it's a more equal field than traditional media. If I have more money, I can put more posters and I can do more rallies. Social media is cheap. It actually equalizes the imbalance in money in that sense.
Thank you, sir. I actually had one more question with permission of Rao, sir. Can I go ahead, sir?
Yeah, quickly, please.
Yeah. So my second question is like around, more than 53% of population of India is youngsters. And we see there is a mismatch at the people who are leading the country and the ones who are, being governed. There's a mismatch in generation. So do you see in the long run it being overcome? And more so over for women especially, there's a very, a very small number of women leaders there at the top. So what is the remedy for it?
Okay, in fact, there were 4 graphs which I had in the presentation, which I deleted because I wanted to keep it to 25 minutes, which had the age, and you have got it exactly right. Forget now, the average age of parliament is going up. The number of young MPs as a proportion of parliament has been coming down steadily since 1952. Okay, women, our representation has very, very slowly increased from 5% in 1952 to 14% now. Still obviously nowhere near 50%, which is the population share, or even 33%, which is the reservation rate. So clearly underrepresented. What is the solution? Solution is again, vote out the older people. See, the power of democracy is that your vote and voting behavior will change the behavior of parties and candidates. We don't use that well enough. If there's an older person and a younger person standing, vote for the younger person. Next time, both parties will put up younger people. The way they do the caste, they will do age. Put pressure on parties to have more women candidates contesting, then you'll have more women there. So it has to be that means. Because the reservation will also have its own problems, right? People will not see them as equal. There are those issues also. I'm not saying that we should not do it, but there are those issues.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think, sir, we have discussed for more than 100 minutes. So thank you so much for your patient response to all the questions that we have taken from the audience. Professor Prasad, do you have any comment before we wrap it up?
I think we have covered a lot of terrain in a very unknown subject and got a lot of some basic understanding of what's happening.
Yes. This is, I honestly agree with you that this is an unknown subject to a large number of people, especially from the domains that we see regularly. But the very purpose of PRS legislative research, their objectives is to strengthen the voice of people, their representation, and strengthen the functioning of the democratic republic that we are towards achieving the vision of the Constitution, like equality, fraternity, justice. All these parameters we are supposed to pick up, provided there is enough research on one hand for the members of the parliament to actually reflect properly on that and come up with good laws and policies. And the other, the inputs and the representation from the people, the conscious, the citizens who are very, very conscious of their rights and their requirements should represent, get in a conversation and make sure that the accountability of the person that they have elected stays very, very, the word that is, it is sanctified if we actually toe that line. I think that that's where the parliament and the democracy and the constitution will remain highly, highly valuable for our requirements and functioning. It is agreed that India is a bundle of contradictions with the predictions that people made, as Dr. Madhavan has mentioned initially. The predictions about India, about its diversity and composition, whether it will continue to be a nation, those doubts, similar kinds of doubts we'll have even now, because the diversity is much, much more. Of course, we have traveled quite a bit. Democracy is really working. So it's a wonder that is India every time that we look at it and we understand all these matters. Your talk today, sir, has been quite insightful. And some of the points that you mentioned are very, very interesting for us. Like the way we are raising a question and we are also trying to clarify again and again. It is not just about the position, but about the fact that we don't know much and we are not spent much reflecting on those aspects. So it's a clarification that some of the speakers, some of the participants also have sought from you. Some of the highlights that you mentioned that, India continues to be a democratic country and therefore it stays as a nation, number one. Number two, your stand that anti-defection law should be done away with. The kind of company that we are keeping with respect to those democracies which are having anti-defection law is quite depressive. That's not the kind of company that we should keep. We should be behaving like mature democracies, as you mentioned. That's a very, very interesting point. And the third point is that decrease the power of the parliament and increase the power of assemblies, which is to become more federal, which is to have more participation from the states, what they need, what are the requirements, and those have to be reflected. Let the power of the state assemblies, let their decision-making be improved. I think that's another very, very important aspect. If people are interested in a functioning democracy, a democracy that works for them, they will have to participate. And organizations like PRS Legislative Research will have to get its funding or its support from people. I think that's a very clear position that you have taken, and that's the only way it can work. That's quite appealing to me, and it's a very interesting insight as well. The other thing that you have mentioned, and it is very, very important, is that the two-party system that we all talk about is a misnomer, and it has to be understood in its right context. If there are people who are ready to question and ready to participate and involve, any number of parties can do that. It is about the representative and participative behavior of the citizens in actually questioning the accountability or testing the accountability of the persons or representatives who are out there in the parliament. So these are some of the highlights, apart from the several nuances that you have explained in terms of how the parliament is functioning, in terms of its meeting, number of days that it meets, in terms of the bills that it passes, the business it conducts, the diversity within the parliament and assemblies in terms of the age diversity, in terms of gender diversity, all we have to go a long way. We need to improve on those parameters. It's a fantastic, as I said, fantastic and insightful conversation that you have triggered today, sir. Thank you so much. These wise views will stay with us we will be thankful to you. We will attempt a summary with the help of Professor Ved, and we'll share a copy of that with you so that you can also add your inputs, and then we'll put it on our archives. For now, I want to thank you so much for this time and expertise.
Thanks a lot. And I mean, your summary, especially of what PRS does, brought a thought to my mind that it was so accurate that I should take you along for my fundraising meetings. so you actually captured it exactly. So thanks a lot. I enjoyed it, and I hope people enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Great, sir. Great. Thank you. So friends, we will be signing off for now. We will see you next Friday at 6:30 p.m. with another leader from ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel organization. We are going to talk about turnaround leaderships. That is next Friday, 6:30 p.m. Till then, read more about the country that we are living in, read more about PRS legislative research, and ask those questions that we have not been asking. And that's well spent 100 minutes or more than 100 minutes today. We have to be thankful to our distinguished Dr. Madhavan for his time. And thanks for triggering all these thoughts on us, sir, once again. Thank you.
Thank you.
So just one thing.
Yes, sir.
Everything that all our research is available in public domain. So prsindia.org if anybody is interested.
Wow, great, sir. Great. So we'll work on it. We'll search and we'll come back to you. We'll also keep writing to you. You can respond to us whenever you are free. Once again, thank you all for joining this conversation. We will meet you next Friday at 6:30 p.m. Good night.